Hi, it's Gitanjali here from High Definition U, and I am thrilled today to be having a conversation with Kelly Galligan, who is joining us from, well, not quite New York, but from Pennsylvania. Kelly is an MD and the head, let me get this right, of commercial real estate, finance, legal, and she's going to tell us a little bit more about that shortly. Kelly actually joined AIG in 2007, and in fact, her manager who hired her then, 14 years later, is her manager again. And she's really someone in the business that is known as a trusted advisor, someone that doesn't just listen, someone that listens with intention. And because of that, said manager may have referred to her as the floor psychologist in a lovely way, where people actually come to her and she's able to really listen and help them to problem solve. And that's something that she's taken through to a couple of passions, one that we're going to hear more about in a little bit, I'm sure, but particularly in her work at AIG with one of the ERG, the Employee Resource Groups, which is looking at really accelerating the process and the progress of women at AIG within the Women and Allies group. So I'm thrilled to spend a little bit more time with her today. Kelly, welcome. So lovely to have you here.
Thank you so much, Gita. That was such a lovely introduction. Thank you.
Well, I'm really excited to hear how you describe what you do, because that was a mouthful and I had to have a little think about it. How would you describe what it is that you do, Kelly, to a little child?
Sure. I think it's difficult to describe what most lawyers do, right? If you're a lawyer and you're not in a courtroom, it's really difficult to say, okay, this is what I do. So I have children, I love children, and for my children, what I describe to them is that I help people make their visions for places happen. So their vision to build a building in Manhattan, a big office tower, and like what that should look like. Or we've talked a lot about, the new vision for what used to be Ground Zero, which is now such a beautiful development with a beautiful landscape and memorial, and the newness of that area to them. I've also talked to them about even just shopping centers and like how we have needs, and I help fulfill the needs of the community by helping builders and lenders and other parties involved in real estate transactions make things happen.
I love that idea of really creating a vision, like bringing a vision to life for people. I've never heard a lawyer described that way. I like that.
Yeah.
Can you take us back a little bit? Because, that's 13 years at AIG and you had a career prior to that. Can you take us back to the early days of your career, Kelly, and tell us a little bit? You're a busy mom now with lots of different commitments and responsibilities. I wonder if you can speak a little bit to what that was like in the early stages of your career, of maybe dealing with that overwhelm and those different responsibilities, and how you not even controlled your emotions, but how did you process those?
Yeah. When I entered the workforce, it was tough. I started my career at a law firm, and it was extremely stressful for me in that I had never been in such an intense, pressure-laden situation. Most of the pressure-laden situations actually in my life were related to, prior to that point, were related to competition, we're competing today, this is what we're doing. We haven't talked about this yet, Gita, but I was competitive in equine events. So I rode hunter jumper over fences, but later switched and rode in competitions called Western reining competitions. And, that kind of competitive stuff is akin, but not really, to the pressure cooker that is every day and how you feel. Decisions that you make or the performance you have today could be of such a great impact or not. So for me, and looking back and evolving as a person, I realized that my overwhelm could come from many different places. My overwhelm could come from something very basic, as in the lack of sleep, not having eaten enough, and things like that. And I think early in our career when we're pushing ourselves to meet really, really difficult deadlines and so forth. Sometimes we may neglect those very basic needs for ourselves, with sleep and exercise and food and all that. So, once you eliminate those, try to understand where everything else is coming from. So, for me, I tried to get a better understanding of the context within which I was working. And, I learned that through working closely with some mentors I found in my department and even outside of the department at the law firm. Often a project, when we're juniors on a team, a project will come to us and we don't understand why the project is important, the context of it. So I encourage people to ask the bigger questions about the context of a project. Hopefully the people you're working with will be willing to engage in that conversation and give you their time. Realizing time is precious and things need to get done. Of course, there's a balance in how deep you go with the questions, but I do believe that getting context for what you're doing can help you calm yourself in terms of how impactful what you're doing is and where your focus needs to be.
I love that. I mean, that.
Yeah. And we talked about emotion, Jada, and, how the feeling of overwhelm, right? Like, what do you do with that? And I read a lot about that because I am someone who, I'm a middle child of 5, and I was someone who was relatively quiet as a child, and coming into, the big New York City law scene was really foreign to me. So I did feel overwhelmed, and sometimes I would want to cry, or sometimes I just wouldn't really understand what's going on. And then I've read a lot about how to deal with those emotions. And, some folks are prone to anger, or something. It depends on who you are and how you react. But a few different things, like all of those emotions are human emotions. So the fact that we would ever pretend that they don't exist is completely ridiculous, right? I mean, they're completely ridiculous. And so I do think that, some level of emotion in the workplace is okay. And obviously you don't want to be crying in front of your boss, your first week of work, but recognizing that, where you're feeling and how you feel is a valid place, and exploring why you feel that way, what's deficient, what information you need to feel more secure is really valid.
And I love that bit at the beginning also, where you were talking about self-care and recognizing that, as you say, as part of the context, because there's a big difference between overwhelm and overload. And overload is those are the pressures, working those 15-hour days. But the overwhelm, as you said, can come from actually those simple, or seemingly simple now when we're talking about it, in this environment, but those self-care acts that maybe we're not explicitly told about, particularly early in our career, to look at that as part of the context for why you're feeling a certain way. And I love the idea of asking the questions also of who can help you through that situation. And as you said, you had mentors as part of that, which is such an incredibly powerful part of the process.
Yeah, and also, thinking about how your career is a really, really long trajectory of hills and valleys, and it's a marathon, and athletes need rest. Athletes need not only rest, physically speaking, us as professionals using our brains all day, right? I think that when you go through an intense session, an intense while of work, you really need to give yourself the ability to disconnect. And it is, for me anyway, that disconnection time often is when I have my epiphanies. I'm not concentrating on the problem, or and then when you come back, you may have a fresh perspective.
And there's science behind that, actually, in terms of what's going on in your brain when you're in a very different set of waves, rather than busy beta waves. Actually go into alpha waves, which is why I say to clients a lot, just wait for the shower moment, because that thing that we're talking about, you're going to have a moment in the shower where you're going to go, oh, and you're like, I wish I had the waterproof pen to kind of write down that answer, or I need to speak to such and such, or I figured it out. I mean, the brain is absolutely, it's so magnificent. I mean, you mentioned balance as well, and I wonder if you can talk a little bit about, finding that balance. You're a leader, you're an MD. whatever stage you're at in your career, you're potentially leading a group, whether it's, of peers or not. How do you find that balance between leading a group and, hearing out the opinions and positions of your peers?
Yeah, really, that's a hard one, but it depends on your audience. So as you become more senior in your career, you'll become really adept at identifying your audience and what you're hoping to get from the particular meeting, the particular task, the particular conversation. So when I'm going into something that has a really diverse audience, and when I say diverse in this context, I'm talking about very senior leaders and more junior people, junior folks potentially on my team helping me with the project, helping me with the goal. I try extremely hard to bring them in early in the process and offline. So some people may say, the best way to get a project off the ground is to have a big meeting and kick it off. But my goal usually is before you walk into that meeting, everybody's on board. So you can do that in many different ways. For me, I know that different people have different talents, and we, of course, want to elevate those talents. We want to give them a chance to showcase those talents. So I often will ping them in advance and say, hey, we're going to talk about XYZ. I think that you have a lot to contribute on this part. And I'd love to hear your ideas. If you want to talk about them in advance, we can do that. Otherwise, know that we're going to talk about that on Tuesday. So I think that level of preparation and intention, letting people that you know in advance you value their feedback is so incredibly important. And it'll help you frame how you're going to position whatever it is you're asking or whatever it is you're proposing in this larger context. And that also gives you a sense of whether or not you're on the right track as a leader. Right? So for me, in bringing people along, I do think, for better or worse, it takes a lot of time. So it takes a lot of time to be a leader that can get that coalition of support to identify where people's talents are and showcase them. But not only do that, but give people opportunities to do things they've never done before. So if they don't know, if your team doesn't know that a particular opportunity is there, and it comes up in a larger context and it's already been given to someone else, I do think that can contribute to a situation where people feel slighted.
So there's a lot of thinking before and preparation before some of these big projects kick off. And as I'm hearing you talk, there's the idea that you're doing that from a leadership position for your team. But I often say to early career talent, your lead is just with a little L right now. And actually, there's nothing stopping them from having those conversations, creating that coalition and getting a sense of buy-in their peers beforehand, right? I mean, I think the thing that's stopping them is probably fear. And that's why today we're talking about curiosity and courage as part of the conversation.
Absolutely.
So I feel like, finding that balance, that you don't have to wait until you've got that sense of hierarchy, right?
No, everybody's a leader. Everybody can be a leader. It's not really about hierarchy. You are leading whatever you're working on.
Yeah.
So,
it's a challenge now because definitely we're in a different environment, as we recognize. And, we're working from home, obviously, in most situations, and we're dealing with that virtually. Can you give us a bit of insight into, we're not particularly exposed in that typical way of the office politics and the drama that might happen because we're not in person. But what advice would you give to when we do go back to that type of office setting? What's the best way to address that type of work drama or that tension in the office?
Yeah, that's funny. I think that drama will find you if you invite it. So, know who you are, decide who you're going to be. So if you're going to be the person to talk about other people in the office in a derogatory way, know that you've invited that and know that you've invited it into your orbit. Meaning, don't be surprised when people talk about you. I think that, it's really the golden rule. It applies everywhere. I teach it to my children as well. So drama will find you if you open the door to it. It definitely will. So, you're never gonna be sorry for not having made the snarky comment. So, my advice is always to take the high road in situations like that. And if you're saying something that doesn't necessarily help in a constructive way to get to a goal for your team, in terms of maybe somebody is handling a project ineffectively, but if you're not raising your hand and making a concrete suggestion as to how it could be handled differently, perhaps how you're going to help, or how you could even offer just the suggestion in a constructive way, then you shouldn't say anything at all. You really shouldn't. I think that creates a very negative culture inside of an organization. And no matter how many plans you have to make about, doing great things, if the culture turns negative, if the culture turns toxic, you're really not going to get anywhere. People say culture eats strategy for breakfast. That's so you probably heard that before. And, and I do think, this environment we're in now creates a different kind of tension. And honestly, especially in the early days of COVID, I work in the real estate industry, mortgage finance. As you can imagine, the real estate market is really upside down right now. So we had a lot of our borrowers coming to us and asking for some level of relief, and so we're dealing with hundreds of requests, professionals all around the world trying to evaluate the impact of their portfolio. As you can imagine, there were some really, really stressful conversations. And in this environment where you're not always on video, sometimes it's just conference calls, there could be 50 people on the phone, it can be super stressful. And, emails, the whole culture of email, and a lot of us just love to email because it's so fast, or IM or whatever we're doing, that's really fun. But emails can be edgy. Emails can come off in a way that you might not intend. You're taking emails in a way they weren't intended. And I think, taking a step back and realizing the medium may be perpetuating these negative feelings is a good thing. And if you're feeling like that, take it out of that medium. You can do that. You don't need to respond to the email. You can request a phone call. You can call them. And then, I have seen during this, the last few months, people are really, really stressed, and sometimes they react really in an angry way, and it's not really personal. And I read an essay, or an excerpt of an essay by Warren Buffett. And, he's the Oracle of Omaha, right? And he has so much great advice. And I think he was talking about one of his mentors. And, at the risk of saying something we shouldn't say on video, he was talking about his mentor, and his mentor had told him, if you're angry and, you have emotions, he said, you can always tell someone to go to hell tomorrow, like kind of thing.
Tomorrow.
So, you can do that. So, before taking that action that you can't take back, whether it's a snarky email, whether it's the comment in the hallway, whether it's getting explosive on a phone call, you can think it through, and you could come back later and you can say, okay, well, what do we really want to accomplish here? What do we really
I think that's such great advice, because you started by saying that it's about, drama invites drama, and choose who you want to be. And, it reminds me of one of my favorite Dolly Parton quotes, which is, figure out who you are and do it on purpose. And right. And doing it on purpose, as you're just saying, it allows you this opportunity to, and this is a recurring theme of the work that I do around making a conscious choice. And if it's to be angry in that moment, then be angry in that moment, but understand that that's what you're being, and what the potential consequences might be. And that's the profoundly human existence that we have, right? Is that we can choose our response rather than automatically react, which most other species have to do. So I think there's so much power in that, Kelly, in terms of tangibly, what does that mean around the way you're communicating, the channels of communication that you're choosing, and the opportunities that you're taking to pause and reflect in, truly stressful, emotional, overwhelming, all of these things we've been talking about, to then potentially act with courage from that place.
Absolutely.
Interesting times. And there's a lot to be curious about in these times. I'm wondering what you're curious about right now, Kelly.
Oh gosh, I'm curious about a lot of things. We talked about some of the things I'm curious about, which have nothing to do with my day job, really inspired by my life experience, having to do with patients in critical care settings and advocacy for them. Mm. So, and now, think about the COVID environment. It's more, everything is harder. Everything is harder. It's harder to care for loved ones. It's harder to see loved ones. It's, and what does the future of care look like? Mm. I mean, we already knew that in the medical system in the United States, it's relatively impersonal, and it's kind of like a machine. It's the protocols for treating XYZ, and that's what we do, and this is what the doctors say. But often, in my own experience, being an educated person too, I found that even I was getting lost, and it was very difficult for me in caring for a loved one, and figuring out the path and figuring out what options were. So that's something that I am passionate about, and on the side that I'm working with a friend on, like a very specific area in terms of providing a handbook and for patients' critical care settings, specifically brain cancer patients and their families, on the potential options available to them and resources.
I think that's so important, because there's a danger, I think, particularly, well, at any stage in our career, but early in your career, where you are just fully focused on what's the next step and advancement and, potentially the promotion, etc., that you might convince yourself that you don't have time to be curious or have passions outside of that, when in fact, that level of passion and curiosity that you have about something, as you said, that's outside of your day job, you never know where that's actually going to converge. And it may only be that it gives you a level of passion and energy that you then bring back to your day job. The two may never converge in a tangible manner outside from that, but actually filling you with that sense of purpose. Absolutely. Wow, you're a much more engaged employee at the end of that day when you've activated that curiosity about the other piece that you obviously feel so passionate about.
Yeah, I think so. And as you know, I'm a real estate professional, and I've spent all my life in real estate in one way or another. Even when I was in high school, I worked for my dad, who was a land surveyor, really out there like George Washington, doing the surveys with the transit and the at the time a long tape and measuring the land and all that. But even I talk about my passion about like finding that, patient care advocacy piece is very important to me. But, something I'm exploring, and I'm almost a little hesitant to share, because it's like, hey, people might call me and tell me how bad of an idea this is. And I'll get on that in a second. But there is, there can be fear in sharing. But, the idea that of creating a business that ties in with my legal expertise. Right? So a business that...
Yeah, maybe you can talk a bit more about that in terms of, as you said, around, how have you had to act with courage in your career? This is an example where you're like, oh, maybe, someone might say that's not a great idea. When have you had to really act with courage in your career, Kelly?
Oh, my, I can think early in my career, like really right out of college, right? And I had a job that was my first legal job. I didn't know what I was doing at all. I was shy, and I had two lawyers that I worked for. And, looking back and looking at my performance, I think it might be helpful to people to understand the dynamics. So in that particular context, I worked for one lawyer who was he was just a wonderful person, and he was very supportive, and he took to teaching me and really wanted me to succeed. And I did a lot of work for him, and my work was excellent, always consistently excellent. And there was another attorney who I thought didn't like me for whatever reason. I didn't think he liked me. And I developed a block, some kind of block. So no matter what I did for him, the work product would have a mistake in it. almost always. And, as a young person right out of college, it was very difficult for me to get over that. And I struggled a lot with it. And so I ended up talking to my mentor, the one that I was so successful with. And I said, I admit my work is not as good for him. I don't know what to do. And ultimately, he was able to help me unearth my insecurities with respect to this other attorney. And he suggested some things that I could do to bridge. And one of those was asking him to lunch. And so I could get more comfortable with this person because I was having this block with him. And it's so funny. Once I got to know him as a person and I got over whatever fear or judgment I had had about him, I was able to perform much better because I removed that emotional barrier. Right? I was able to do that.
And the crucial part of that is you did it, right? You removed that emotional barrier. It wasn't on him to ask you out to lunch.
No.
Sometimes we spend our thinking time on they could have and they should have, especially early in our career when we're waiting for people to kind of guide us through that process.
Right. So I encourage people, if you're having a problem with a person, sometimes the best thing to do is just to go right to them. And you come to it from a place of curiosity, right? You're not coming to say, hey, why don't you like me? It's not about that. And obviously the person wants to work with you. They're seeking your input, right? So there are ways to explore that without being aggressive. And then, much more recently, but not too recently, I worked through the financial crisis, and boy, was that scary, right? So I was at AIG. I've been at AIG since 2007, and 2008 came, 2009 came, and personally, that was an extremely hard time. My husband had lost his job. So, we were married just a little while, and it just seemed like everything was coming down around us. And, but at AIG, it's amazing. The people of AIG are what makes AIG, right? And there were so many people inside the organization that were committed to turning it around and making success happen. We had an extremely inspirational leader. I encourage everybody to read about Bob Ben-Moshe. Really, really inspirational leader, the right leader for that time. And as we were emerging, one of my former colleagues used to say we were emerging like a phoenix from the ashes, and figuring ourselves out, there was opportunity. And I had been a very real estate person up until that point, but I heard about the notion that we'd have the opportunity to invest in a different way that we had invested before. So that pivot required a lot of work, required a lot of interface with senior leaders outside of my direct organization. And it was a completely different area of law that I had not touched yet. So I don't know. I had felt at that time, this is a risk I can take, right? I'm working inside of a group of people that I trust. So I went to my general counsel and I said, I'm going to do that project. And he says, well, who are you? You don't know what you're doing. And I said, well, I don't know if you know what you're doing. So, but by that point, relationships have been built, right? And that's why the relationships are so important. You build the relationship, so you could go in there and have a little gumption, and that's okay. And then, I took the risk, I built the relationships, and we ended up launching kind of crazy. I think we did our first big deal when we were all displaced during Hurricane Sandy.
Oh, wow. Wow.
So
my goodness.
I remember, I lived in a really, really tiny house on Long Island at the time, and my boss, the same boss I just referenced, he lived in a much more palatial place than I did, but he had no power. And I'll never forget, he came to my little tiny house and we had power. And at the time I had a 9-month-old child, and my children are only 18 months apart. So my daughter was 2. So he arrived at the house, and we're going to launch this initiative that I've been working on for so long. He arrives and he walks in the house and he says, okay, well, where's the office? And I say, well, you're looking at it. Here we are. And, just being willing, looking back, being willing to say, well, this is who I am. This is what we've got. Yeah. He was on the phone with people in China later that day, and my son was climbing on him, and I'm thinking, hey, we're getting it done.
That's right. And having the courage to just take the steps, right, without overthinking all of those things. I think that's so powerful. Amazing. Thank you. So, all right, now we are going to move forward we can take all of that curiosity and courage, and we're going to go into the lightning round, deeper into Kelly and the amazingness that you are. So are you ready, Kelly?
We'll see.
Yeah. What is your favorite word?
Failure.
Oh, I like that.
It's a really scary word, but I'm telling you, failure is okay. I say this to people in interviews, even in job interviews. Failure is okay. You have curiosity, you go try something. Hey, it didn't work. Okay, what do we do next? We pivot to the next thing. Mm-hmm. My kids, they try, water skiing. They fall over. Do they say, oh, I failed, I'm never going to do it again? No, they say, keep going. So
only we could all be like kids. I love it.
Yeah, it's all just like failure is your way to find, it's how you find your way. It's how you find your way.
So what's the opposite of that then? Not the opposite of that necessarily, but what's your least favorite word?
Oh my goodness. My least favorite word, disrespect.
Good. What is your go-to takeout order?
Oh gosh. It's kale salad with some kind of protein on top from Dig Inn and a ton of roasted vegetables. I just love that stuff.
That is unbelievably healthy. I can't believe it. What is one book or TED Talk that everyone should absolutely read or watch?
Brené Brown, The Power of Vulnerability.
Favorite.
Everyone. The guys too. Everyone. Universally applicable.
And if you had one superpower, Kelly, what would it be?
Oh, that's easy. I'd be able to levitate. I'd be able to just be above it all and observe.
I love
that.
And what sound or noise do you love?
The sound of my children laughing. It's just all is right with the world.
And what profession other than your own would you like to attempt?
I'd love to run a lunch counter. So I'd love to have a breakfast and lunch counter that's the center of conversation and community for a small town.
Oh, I love that. And if you could have a billboard with anything on it, what would it be?
Oh, it costs nothing to be kind.
That is lovely. Thank you so much for that. My very final question for you is, what's one thing that you're grateful for right now?
I'm grateful for the earth, for being grounded, for having the blessing of this earth and walking outside with bare feet and feeling it and being grounded and touching it and appreciating how fortunate we are to have what we have in terms of nature and our environment and cherishing it.
Wonderful. Well, I am grateful for you. Thank you for agreeing to sit down and chat with me. It's been absolutely delightful, and I'm very, very grateful that you're sharing your insights. And I'm sure if people want to get in touch with you, then they can find you on LinkedIn. I will be stalking you more, as you already know. Thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it. And I hope you have a wonderful day touching the earth with your bare feet.
Thank you, Gita. Good luck to everyone. Be well.